Hello and welcome to Vantage this week, a show where we recap the highlights of the week gone by. The biggest news this week came from Iran, where the President Ebrahim Raisi died in a helicopter crash. His sudden demise has led to a succession crisis in Iran. But how exactly did his chopper crash? We'll bring you the details. When a leader dies like this, it also raises a lot of questions, and people always come up with creative answers. Raisi's death is no different. It has led to some outlandish conspiracy theories. And speaking of theories, let's look at one which is close to becoming a reality: China's possible invasion of Taiwan. Will it happen? What are the risks? And how is Taiwan prepared to respond? This week, we'll also have a story that seems miraculous. A man spent 100 days underwater and he emerged 10 years younger. We explain the science behind this de-aging. All this and more lined up. Let's get started. We begin with Iran and the tragic developments there. A helicopter crash that resulted in the death of their president and foreign minister. The chopper went missing yesterday. Today, the worst was confirmed. Tehran has declared 5 days of mourning, but it also insists that there won't be a disruption, that the government will continue operating. It will be a big test for the hardliners who rule the country. They must find a successor, and they must do so quickly. Someone who can steer Iran through one of the most volatile periods in West Asia. Tonight, as we recount the events of the last 24 hours, we'll also look at the road ahead. And we begin with some images, the last moments of President Ebrahim Raisi.
بازدید رئیس جمهور از راهگذر ترانزیتی شمال غرب کشور مسیری مواصلاتی به هم متصل می‌کند.
در مرز کلاله و بعد از اون به موازات مرز
سدی که تهران و باکو آن را نما.
This video was aired by Iranian state TV. The chopper crashed on Sunday. Raisi and his team were in the northeast of Iran, in the province called East Azerbaijan. It's on the border between Iran and Azerbaijan, but the crash happened in Iranian territory. They were returning from a ceremony, a dam opening at the border. It was a high-profile event. Azerbaijan's president, Ilham Aliyev, was also present. So this ceremony was Raisi's last official act as Iran's president. The chopper went down in this area, the Dizmar protected area. It's a wildlife corridor spread across Iran's border with Azerbaijan. There were 9 officials on board this chopper. The president was accompanied by Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian, a governor, a cleric, and 5 other close aides. No one survived the crash. Their deaths were announced by Iranian state TV this morning.
We are all from God and we go back to Him. The servant of Imam Reza and the servant of people, Dr. Sayyid Ebrahim Raisi, the President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, became a martyr in the path of serving the people.
So what happened? Why and how did the chopper crash? The details are limited as of now. Here's what we have. This was a hilly area covered by dense forest. As you can see, the weather was poor yesterday. There was a thick fog over the area, and these conditions could have led to the crash. The Iranian press is reporting that Raisi's chopper made a hard landing, so the weather may have caused complications for the pilot. But did the helicopter malfunction? The possibility cannot be ruled out. The president and his team were flying in a Bell 212. That was the name of the chopper, Bell 212. It's an American chopper, a 4-decade-old relic, most likely bought before the Islamic Revolution during the rule of the Shah. This was a non-combat chopper designed to ferry government officials. So the chopper was fit for the purpose. But was it fit for flying? 40 years is a long time, even for the best of machines. Iran has been under Western sanctions for years now. It did not have access to replace parts of the chopper or to any new equipment. Now, it's not clear how well this machine was maintained. Here's what experts say. Given the lack of technology and upgrades, the pilot had to rely solely on their ability to navigate tricky situations like bad weather or difficult terrain. So the helicopter could have been outdated. As it turned out, 2 more choppers were part of Raisi's convoy. Both survived. It was only the president's ride that crashed. Was this a case of foul play then? So far, there's nothing to suggest that. Tehran has been treading cautiously. Yesterday, we heard from Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, and he chose his words carefully.
Whether you are present here or those who will hear my message later, be sure that there will be no disruption in the work of the country. Officials have been busy with their work very strongly since this evening after hearing the news of the incident.
Israel has been cautious too. When the announcement came today, Israeli officials were quick to distance themselves. Israel says they had no role whatsoever in this crash. What about the United States? The American president is yet to comment. Reports say Joe Biden has been briefed. He's yet to make a public statement. Leaders from the UAE, Russia, China and the European Union have all spoken. They've offered condolences to Tehran. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi also issued a statement. He was in fact among the first leaders to offer condolences. And what about the people of Iran? How have they reacted to President Raisi's death? Well, the reactions have been mixed. Inside Iran, in some pockets, people took to the streets to mourn their president's death. Some crowds were seen in neighboring Iraq too. But some reports paint a different story. They say people distributed sweets when Raisi and his allies were declared dead. Outside Iran, in Germany and the UK, some Iranians in exile celebrated. In the days ahead, the world will be closely watching Iran. Mohammad Mokhber, Iran's current vice president, has taken charge for now. This is a temporary appointment. If a serving president passes in office, Iran's constitution mandates a fresh election. Some observers fear that this tragedy could spark a power struggle.
I mean, I think a lot of people might celebrate or might be happy, but also a lot of people, I think, naturally would be very worried. We all expected a ferocious struggle for power to begin after Khamenei dies. It might have already begun with this incident.
There are no obvious successors in sight yet. How the hardliners navigate the situation could determine the future of the regime and that of the country. A mysterious chopper crash, an hours-long search and a dead president. It's what conspiracy theorists live for. You can spin it any way you want. Some are blaming Israel, some are blaming the US, and some are even blaming space lasers. It's all very absurd and baseless, but right now it could also be dangerous. We are talking about a nervous regime here. A regime with many enemies around the world. So the goal should be clarity, not conspiracies. At the same time, it's important to keep track of what's being said, even though some of these claims are absolutely wild. Let's show you theory number one, a Mossad hit job. Mossad is Israel's spy agency. They're famous for James Bond-style operations. So many social media accounts say Mossad did it. And Mossad have taken out Iranian officials in the past, including nuclear scientists. But taking out a president is high risk. It's an open act of war. Hamas accounts say the chopper's pilot was Israeli, a Mossad agent, wait for it, a Mossad agent named Eli Copter. A few news channels, in fact, fell for it. But frankly, it's a stretch. Israel gains nothing by killing Raisi in the middle of a war. It would actually be counterproductive. Nonetheless, Israel is worried about these reports. One of their officials has even reacted. He had just one thing to say: it wasn't us. And it's important to set the record straight because conspiracy theories get a life of their own. Which brings us to the second theory, a US hand. Again, there is precedent here. The Americans have a history of hit jobs overseas, which is why Washington is in damage control.
The United States had no part to play in that crash, and that's a fact, plain and simple. It could be a number of things: mechanical failure, pilot error, you name it. So.
How about that? Iran has not blamed the US for the crash, yet Washington says it wasn't us. Again, chances are they're right. Joe Biden is struggling to contain one war in West Asia. It's unlikely he would start a second one. Having said that, the US does have an indirect role in this. Raisi was flying an old American helicopter, a Bell 212 model from the 1960s. Now, aircraft require regular maintenance and repairs, but Iran couldn't do that. Why? Because of Western sanctions. So some Iranians do hold the US responsible for their president's death. Like former Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, listen to what he said. One of the culprits behind yesterday's tragedy is the United States, because of its sanctions that bar Iran from procuring essential aviation parts. Well, on paper, he's right, but the sanctions did not come from thin air. It was the result of Iran's nuclear program, so blaming the US does not really help, and you had decades to look for alternatives or build your own. Now let's look at theory number 3. An internal power struggle. Raisi was expected to succeed Ayatollah Khamenei as Iran's supreme leader, but now they need a replacement. A lot of pundits are betting on this man, like we told you, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of Iran's current supreme leader. The question is, did his supporters sabotage Raisi's chopper? Well, he certainly had the motive. Look at what a former US advisor on Iran has said. I'm quoting again. Internal pundits had believed the competition to succeed Khamenei as supreme leader was down to Mojtaba and Raisi. If Raisi is dead, Mojtaba becomes heir apparent. I know, very Game of Thrones. But motive alone is not enough. You need the means to pull something off. Khamenei handpicked Raisi to become Iran's president, to possibly even succeed him. Would his son dare to kill that protege? Again, highly unlikely. Mojtaba's claim is already a bit weak. Most regime loyalists do not like the idea of hereditary succession. So even Raisi's death does not assure his elevation. Which brings us to the last theory, theory number 4, and probably the weirdest of them all. Space lasers. A lot of social media accounts are posting this. They claim that Raisi's chopper was shot down using lasers. Needless to say, it's fake. But why space lasers? Because it's a popular anti-Semitic trope. Let me take you back to 2018. The US state of California was hit by wildfires. Most experts said climate change made it worse, but one politician had a different take. Her name was Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's a far-right Republican. And she said that Jewish space lasers caused these wildfires. And since then, others have picked it up. It has become a popular anti-Semitic trope. Like I said, all this sounds absurd, even borderline funny. But we should not let these theories fester. What if they rally public opinion in Iran? What if the regime buys into them? These are all very risky scenarios, which is why Israel and the US were quick to set the record straight. They did not wait for Iran to blame them. They preemptively rejected all of it. The question is, how can we stop these theories from blowing up? Well, that depends on Iran. They're investigating the helicopter crash. Let's hope they find the actual cause. It was most likely a technical issue or bad weather. Once Iran confirms it officially, we can breathe a sigh of relief. Until then, it's conspiracy theory central. Staying with West Asia, let's turn to Iran's sworn enemy, Israel. Their prime minister is facing an arrest warrant. From whom? The ICC, the International Criminal Court. Its chief prosecutor has asked for an arrest warrant. If the judges agree, it will be issued. But what does an ICC warrant mean? Technically, it's like any arrest warrant. You see him, you arrest him. But not every country accepts the ICC's jurisdiction. The likes of Russia, the US and India do not accept it, but 124 nations do. And this includes Israel's allies like France, Austria, Germany and Italy. Those countries will have to arrest Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on their soil. It could limit his ability to travel, which is why Netanyahu is furious. He's launching personal attacks at the ICC prosecutor.
Through this incendiary decision, Mr. Khan takes his place among the great anti-Semites in modern times. He now stands alongside those infamous German judges who donned their robes and upheld laws that denied the Jewish people their most basic rights and enabled the Nazis to perpetrate the worst crime in history.
Very sharp words there, but Netanyahu only has himself to blame. He had many opportunities to end this war. His allies asked him to stop. His friends and partners urged caution, yet Netanyahu pushed on. So there is no point blaming the ICC prosecutor now. The same ICC also issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. Now, I know every war is devastating, but Israel's war is much deadlier than Russia's. More children have died in Gaza than across conflict zones in the last 4 years. So simply put, Netanyahu had it coming. But this story goes beyond the arrest warrant. It also extends to the reactions, to the so-called guardians of the world order. When it suits them, they talk about rules and fairness. When it doesn't, they reject them. I'm talking about the United States of America. President Joe Biden is fuming at the ICC. He says Israel is actually protecting Gazan civilians.
Let me be clear. We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. And it's clear Israel wants to do all it can to ensure civilian protection.
That's news for us. Until recently, Joe Biden said Israel was not protecting civilians. Now he says they are protecting civilians. So which one is it? And Biden's hypocrisy does not end there. Let me take you back to March 2023. The ICC had issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. Listen to Joe Biden's reaction then.
Could you give us your reaction to the International Criminal Court issuing an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think it's justified, but the question is, it's not recognized internationally by us either. But I think it makes a very strong point.
How about that? When the warrant is for Vladimir Putin, it is justified. It makes a strong point. But when it's for Netanyahu, it's outrageous. And honestly, this does not surprise us. The US always picks and chooses which rules to follow. They do not accept the ICC's jurisdiction, yet they're helping the ICC's probe against Putin. Why? Because it suits them. And forget the politics for a moment. Think about the optics. Many countries trust the ICC to make unbiased decisions. It's like a last resort for them. They cannot stand up to big powers and bullies, so they trust the International Criminal Court. And what does the US do? They make a mockery of it in public. So next time Biden talks about a rules-based order, remember this. Always ask yourself, whose rules? Internationally agreed rules or America's own rules? Of course, this whole debate is pinned on one question. Will the judges issue a warrant for Netanyahu? Well, the evidence is there. Most UN agencies have criticized Israel's war. They've also documented major crimes like collective punishment, attack on aid workers, and the targeting of hospitals. If they issued a warrant for Putin, then they're likely to issue one for Netanyahu. You heard his reaction to the whole thing. It was very aggressive and personal, and there's a reason for that. Many Western allies are wary of disobeying the ICC.
If charges were brought against someone, we're not in the habit of having political discussions about how we think it should end. We stand up for the rules. We want to live in a rules-based world.
But of course, the court is the court, and Sweden always upholds the multilateral system, and that also needs to be said very clearly.
Where the member states have said very much that the European Union supports the ICC for its central role in bringing justice to victims in all situations under its jurisdiction.
This warrant is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it has united Israel's coalition. The opposition is now backing Prime Minister Netanyahu again, so is the United States. But the question is for how long? The warrants may not end with Netanyahu. As the case drags on, more Israeli officials could get pulled up, like war cabinet members or military leaders or intelligence officials. And all this pressure will find its way to Netanyahu. His biggest weapon has been the ideological difference between Israel and Hamas. Hamas, a terror group, Israel, a democracy. He used that distinction to deflect blame. But these warrants are shattering that difference. It's something Israel cannot afford. Speaking of Russia, Vladimir Putin has ordered new drills. Not your routine ones. This drill involves tactical nuclear weapons. So the stakes are very high. And so are the political implications. The drills are taking place in Russia's southern military district. It shares a border with Ukraine. Yesterday was the first stage of the drill, the preparation. This involves a lot of important steps like loading fake warheads to launch vehicles, driving to the launch site, and also loading missiles on war planes. Take a look at this. A couple of questions here. One, what are these tactical nukes? And two, why is Russia practicing with them now? There are two types of nuclear weapons, tactical and strategic. Strategic weapons are your big bombs. They can destroy entire cities. But tactical weapons are like mini nukes, powerful but targeted. They cannot wipe out an entire city, but they can cause considerable damage. Most of these tactical weapons were built during the Cold War. Russia is said to have around 2,000 of them, and the US, less than 200. The Americans gradually stopped making tactical nukes, but Russia is still holding on to them. Which brings us to the second question. Why is Moscow holding this drill now? This is what the Defense Ministry is saying, and I'm quoting, to ensure the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Russian state in response to provocative statements and threats of individual Western officials against the Russian Federation. It's not a surprise. Putin has always timed his nuclear rhetoric. First, in late February 2022, Putin placed his nuclear forces on high alert. This was just after the invasion began, so the idea was to deter any Western intervention. In March 2023, that is last year, he did it again. Putin said he would place nuclear weapons in Belarus. Again, the timing was key. It came just before Ukraine's counteroffensive, and finally, this tactical nuclear drill. Some 3,000 Russian soldiers are part of it. They're mainly using two Russian missiles, Iskander and Kinzhal. Both can carry tactical nuclear warheads. So it's a clear warning to the West. We've heard some escalatory comments from European leaders, especially from France and Britain. President Macron keeps talking about sending troops to Ukraine. He said the same thing earlier this month. The UK too is stepping up the rhetoric. Their foreign secretary made an important statement this month. He said Ukraine can use Western weapons to strike inside Russia. And this is a shift. Because initially, the West only allowed defensive use. But now they say you can attack inside Russia. Plus, you have new weapons coming. The US has finally approved a new military package for Ukraine. It's worth almost $61 billion. Those weapons could hit the battlefield soon, which explains Vladimir Putin's decision. It's very unlikely that he will actually use tactical nukes, but the threat itself is enough. The question is, how will the West respond? They've criticized the nuclear drills, but they're not in the mood to back down. In fact, they have found new ways to fund Ukraine's war. How? By making Russia pay for it. Let me explain how this works. When Putin invaded Ukraine, the G7 froze Russian assets. The G7 is the group of 7 Western economies. They froze Russian assets, like gold and foreign exchange. It was worth almost $300 billion. This is Russian money. Now, these assets are generating money, either through profits or through interest, $300 billion. So the European Union is giving these profits to Ukraine. 90% of it for military aid, 10% for other demands. And how much money would that be? Between $16 and $21 billion by 2027. The first payment is expected by July. Russia is obviously fuming at Europe. A Kremlin spokesperson called it theft.
Even this reduced option is nothing more than expropriation, because all those revenues are revenues from our assets, and transferring them to other purposes is also a violation of all the rules and norms of the international financial economic system.
Hard to argue with that. This money is not Putin's personal wealth, it belongs to the Russian people. So what gives Europe the right to appropriate it? The United Nations has not approved this move, neither has any global body. It's a unilateral decision by Brussels. So Russia is responding in kind. They have seized assets of two German banks, Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank. Both these moves will undermine trust in the global financial system. It will weaken investor confidence. But Russia and the West don't seem to care about that at the moment. They're going by the old adage, all's fair in war. So you can hear the drumbeats of war, much like in Europe or West Asia. But the question is, will Xi Jinping give the order? Will he decide to invade Taiwan? It's always been his goal. Taiwan is unfinished business from China's civil war. Mao Zedong could not capture it, so Xi Jinping would love to do it. It would immortalize him and secure his legacy. So tonight we're looking at three questions here. One, how difficult would an invasion of Taiwan be? Two, is China ready for it? And three, what is the world's strategy? Let's start with the first question. An invasion would be extremely difficult. Taiwan is not some helpless island. They're armed to the teeth. Just look at the global firepower rankings. Taiwan ranks 24th. They are ahead of NATO allies like Sweden and Canada. And where does China rank? At number 3. But wars are not fought on tables. In the real world, China will face added challenges like geography and weather. They will have to land soldiers in Taiwan, and that means crossing this stretch of water, the Taiwan Strait. It's around 140 kilometers long. It's also very choppy waters, not ideal for an amphibious operation. But let's assume that China beats the elements. Taiwan will still be prepared. Their strategy is called porcupine defense. I'm talking about this animal, porcupine. It has sharp spikes all over its body and tail, so no one dares to attack it. Why? Because they know that the cost will be too high. And that is Taiwan's strategy. They have invested a lot in defense. Under the last president, defense spending increased by 5% every year. As a share of GDP, it's 2.5%. They spend 2.5% of their GDP on defense. We're talking about a variety of defensive weapons like anti-ship missiles, naval mines, landing spikes, and mobile missile launchers. But again, let's assume that China beats all of this. They land on Taiwan shores. Then once more, they would face geography. Taiwan has a lot of rugged mountains. They offer natural protection to the island's regime. And if you reach the cities, it's going to be urban warfare, like what you're seeing in Gaza. So long story short, it won't be easy. Taiwan has prepared and practiced to repel a Chinese invasion. Their way of life depends on it. So expect a tough and bloody fight if it comes to that. Which brings us to the second question. Is China ready for it? Does Xi Jinping have the appetite for war? US officials have made their own assessment. They think that Xi will wait until 2027. By then, he should have enough firepower. But could he strike earlier? And I ask this for a reason. China's growth is losing steam. Their GDP growth has largely stalled. It is expected to be 3.5% by the end of this decade. Same with their population. China's labor force will be shrinking in 2030 by almost 1%. So there are two ways of looking at it. One, it may force Xi Jinping to advance his invasion because he may think now is the time. If this window closes, it may never happen again. That's one way of looking at it. The second option, he may take the advice of Deng Xiaoping. Deng said, hide your strength, bide your time. Xi Jinping may tweak that advice. He may bide his time and rebuild his strength. The Chinese president is not known to be a maverick. So all bets are on delaying the attack. Plus, any invasion would trigger sanctions. and Beijing must prepare for that too. China has almost 1.4 billion people. You need to secure basic resources for them like food and power. Now, Beijing is already stockpiling food grains. Reports say they have rice and wheat for up to 2 years. But energy is a bit tricky. Most of China's fuel and gas comes from friendly nations like Russia and Saudi Arabia. But they're transported in shipping tankers that can be cut off. So China is working on a solution for that. Their Belt and Road project is trying to link West Asia via land. They're also building gas pipelines from Russia. So China needs to tick a lot of boxes here before they invade. They will get one chance at this. Which brings us to the final question. What is the world's strategy? The Americans are at the forefront of it. A US law requires the White House to support Taiwan, but it does not say how. Is it by deploying soldiers, or giving weapons, or simply offering political support? This lack of clarity is called strategic ambiguity. And Joe Biden has stirred this pot many times. He has said that the US will defend Taiwan. His plan is to build alliances. Let me pull up the map for you once again and show you the countries with US bases. You have the Philippines, you have Japan, South Korea, and Guam. There are thousands of US soldiers stationed in these bases, and not to mention lots of firepower. So if China invades, the US will be close by either to intervene directly or to run support operations. And that's the military side of things. But frankly, the US alone won't be enough. We're talking about a very important region. Taiwan supplies 90% of the most advanced semiconductors to the world, 90%. The waters around it are also crucial. It carries around 21% of global trade. So trouble in Taiwan is trouble for the whole world, yet most countries don't seem bothered. We've seen a lot of activism for Palestine, but we haven't seen the same for Taiwan. They don't even have a seat at the United Nations organizations. The first priority is to change that, because China's biggest weapon is the One China policy, and most countries recognize Taiwan as part of China. The One China policy. So these countries may criticize the Chinese invasion, but how can they actively oppose it? Because their own policy is anti-Taiwan, and diluting this policy will be hard. Taiwan could use its chip superpower to woo other countries. It could set up factories or investments abroad. And frankly, that's the only way. For most countries, China is way more important than Taiwan. Until that changes, their policy will not. Rishi Sunak loves cricket. He may not look very good at it, but he likes it. We've seen him many times with bat in hand, but this time he was bowling a googly to his political rivals. On Wednesday evening, Sunak turned up outside his office, number 10 Downing Street. There was quite a bit of rain around, but the Prime Minister went ahead. He announced that he was calling for elections.
The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July. These uncertain times call for a clear plan and bold action to chart a course to a secure future. You must choose in this election who has that plan.
The optics were not good. Loud music playing in the background, rain all over his suit. None of it looked very appealing, but Sunak had made up his mind. Elections will be held on the 4th of July. It was a surprise to some of his cabinet members. Apparently, even the finance minister did not know. Plus, a lot of Conservative MPs are unhappy. They think Sunak should have waited, maybe called the elections by the end of 2024. So I guess the question is, why did the Prime Minister do it? Well, this is a snap election, meaning it's being held ahead of time. Britain's elections were scheduled for January next year. But Rishi Sunak has moved it up. It's not clear why. One reason could be the economic data. Britain's inflation numbers were published this week. It was around 2.3% in April, a bit lower than what was predicted. Also, Britain has exited a technical recession. Their GDP grew by 0.6% from January to March. That's the highest rate in 2 years, 0.6%. So maybe Prime Minister Sunak thought, this is the chance. The economy won't get better than this, so might as well capitalize. Another reason could be leadership challenge. There were rumors of rebellion this month. Apparently, some Conservative MPs were plotting to oust Sunak. But that won't matter now because elections have been called. So Sunak will lead the Conservative Party. Which brings us to the campaign. All parties have hit the ground running. Today, Labour leader Keir Starmer held his first rally. He promised to rebuild the country.
If you want change, you have to vote for it. And if you vote Labour, it's a vote to stop the chaos. It's a vote to turn the page. And it's a vote to rebuild our country together. For a government to leave after 14 years, our country, with living standards worse than when they started, is absolutely unforgivable.
It's a great chance for Keir Starmer. He's not your Tony Blair sort of firebrand leader, but frankly, he doesn't need to be. Conservatives have ruled Britain for 14 years. Ideally, that should have given stability. One party ruling for 14 years, but not in Britain. They've had 5 prime ministers and 7 finance ministers in this time. One of the PM's Liz Truss lasted less than 50 days. So most British voters are quite fed up. They don't need Starmer to be extraordinary. They need him to be boring. And opinion polls support it. They show Labour Party with 41% votes and Sunak's Conservatives at 20%. If these numbers hold, it could be a landslide win for the opposition. The question is, can Prime Minister Rishi Sunak turn it around? Well, his pitch is quite clear. I am the man who guided Britain through crises, first as finance minister, then as prime minister, and he's got a point there. Just look at all of the events of the last few years. The Wuhan virus pandemic, Russia's war in Ukraine, tensions in the South China Sea, and now a war in West Asia. All of these have contributed to Britain's economic crisis. Plus, it wasn't just Sunak's mess. His predecessors created most of it. But getting this complicated message across will be hard. The Prime Minister made an effort today. He posted a video on social media.
The coronavirus has hit the UK.
Putin announced the military operation just before 3 a.m.
More than 700 Israelis are now feared dead.
Russia is now placing its economy on a war
Breaking
footing.
news,
China
in a major
and
escalation
Russia
of the crisis in the Middle East.
No
Iran has started a direct attack on Israel.
I half expected a caption at the end of that. Rishi Sunak in and as 007. Great filmography, but young Britons would probably say cringe. And that's his biggest challenge, messaging. Today, the Prime Minister visited a pub in Wales. He decided to talk football. The Euro Cup is starting next month, so Sunak asked if the locals were excited about it. But he missed one tiny detail. Wales has not qualified for the Euros.
Is he looking forward to all the football?
Not so much my bag. But
well,
get people in.
No, but that's because you guys aren't in it. Yeah, well, to get people out, you know, there'll be people coming. It'll be good summer.
Same in Scotland. Their leader is not too happy about the election dates. He says it's disrespectful. Why is that? Because July 4th is the first week of holidays in Scotland. So my point is quite simple. Rishi Sunak cannot seem to catch a break. He probably wanted to surprise his rivals with the announcement, but his googly is looking more like a full toss. Now let's tell you about a nightmare at 37,000 feet. Yes, we're talking about that Singapore Airlines flight where chaos erupted. You may have seen the videos already. It was sheer horror. The plane was flying from London to Singapore. It suddenly encountered extreme turbulence. Within 3 minutes, the aircraft dropped over 6,000 feet. The freak weather tore through the plane's interior. Bags were falling out of the overhead cabins. One passenger died on the flight and dozens of others were injured. Here is the full story.
This plane looks like it's been through an earthquake. The entire cabin is in disarray. The ceiling has been ripped open. Masks are dangling. Overhead compartments have dents. There's blood on a passenger's face as well as on some of the seats. These passengers have lived through a nightmare. They were cruising at 37,000 feet when suddenly their plane was hit by extreme turbulence.
I think the entire thing happened within the span of like less than 10 seconds. Like it was really, really quick.
That's Zafran Azmir. He was on board this flight. When the plane took off from London, everything seemed fine. But about 10 hours into the flight, all hell broke loose.
If I remember correctly, I think the seatbelt signs were off. There were people within the lavatories and the crew that were working, but I saw people from across the aisle just like going completely horizontal, hitting the ceiling and landing back down in like really awkward positions. People getting massive gashes in their head, concussions.
There were over 200 passengers on board. Turbulence is quite common while flying, but no one can prepare for a freak incident like this one. The passengers were having breakfast. That's when the plane took a dive. It dropped by over 6,000 feet in just 3 minutes. The flight was supposed to land in Singapore, but the severe turbulence forced the pilot to divert the plane to Bangkok. Everyone realized the full extent of the damage only after the plane landed. Passengers were thrown out of their seats. Many of them had gashes on their heads. 73-year-old Jeff Kitchen was among those passengers too. Unfortunately, he didn't survive the ordeal.
An immediate kind of disbelief at first, and then the plane was felt very level, and it was obvious the gentleman needed some help, so I got up and helped some other passengers get him out of his seat, and we laid him on the floor near the bulkhead so that the medics on the aeroplane, there were some passengers who thankfully were medics, could administer CPR to the gentleman on the aeroplane. They gave CPR for I think about 20 minutes or so.
Kitchen died on the plane, presumably after he suffered a heart attack. The airline has issued an apology, and the government of Singapore has started a probe.
On behalf of Singapore Airlines, I would like to express my deepest condolences to the family and loved ones of the deceased. We are very sorry for the traumatic experience.
But everyone is looking for answers. How could this have happened? While turbulence goes hand in hand with flying, such extreme cases are quite rare. But experts say that they are becoming more frequent, and they are blaming climate change.
Over the last 40 years, severe turbulence has increased by 55%, moderate turbulence by 37%, and slight turbulence or light turbulence by about 17%. So as the weather changes, certainly it is getting more turbulent.
Aircraft are capable of withstanding extreme weather, but the weather is an unpredictable force. Singapore's report will help bridge some of our knowledge gaps. But until then, the best thing passengers can do is to keep their seatbelt on throughout the flight.
Our next story is about Kenya, about their president, William Ruto, who is on a state visit to the US. It's the first state visit by a Kenyan president in over 2 decades, the first since 2003. It's also the first time in 16 years that an African leader is on a US state visit. So it is quite significant, but that's not what it's making news for. President Ruto is being slammed, not because he's in the US, but because of how he chose to get there. He decided to fly in a luxury jet. He chartered a Boeing 737-700 business jet from an Emirati company, the Royal Jet Group. He hired it for about 200 million Kenyan shillings. That's $1.5 million US. Ruto pulled out all the stops. He brought along an entourage of more than 30 people, which includes a famous Kenyan comedian. Everyone traveled to the US in style on the Kenyan taxpayers' dime, and this, more than anything else, has triggered the backlash. Now, some of you may wonder, what is the big deal here? After all, world leaders travel all the time. It's part of the job description. They need to travel to build relations and to negotiate trade deals. In the long run, the trip should more than pay for itself. And all of this may be true. And it's exactly what Ruto is using as his defense. But that has not helped quell public anger. Why? Because of Ruto's policies. He's been tough on Kenyan taxpayers. He became president in 2022 and he has been increasing taxes ever since. Ruto has increased the tax rate on salaries. He has doubled the sales tax on fuel. He has introduced a housing levy, a hospital insurance levy and a turnover tax on small businesses. If it moves, Ruto taxes it. All in the name of fiscal responsibility. Kenya has a mountain of national debt. It was worth over $51 billion as of last December. Ruto had pledged to fix this. That is why he keeps raising taxes. And obviously, this is not a popular move. It puts an added burden on Kenyan citizens who are already struggling with the cost of living crisis and the rising cost of essential food items. In this situation, imagine hearing that your president is flying around in an Emirati jet. The same president who's been raising your taxes, who's been preaching austerity. That same president is taking more than 30 people, including a comedian, to the US. So you can see why the Kenyan people are angry. And this is not the first time, apparently. A few months ago, Ruto was dubbed Kenya's flying president. He's been on more than 50 foreign trips since he took office in 2022, more than 3 every month on average. In the year up to July 2023, he'd spent about $9.2 million on travel, both domestic and international, 9.2 million. Now, this latest US trip alone will cost Kenya $1.5 million. For all the talk about austerity, Ruto's expenses just seem to be growing. So to calm the public down, he needs to have something to show for all of this, which is why this US trip needs to bear fruit. Ruto will have his official meeting with Joe Biden tomorrow. They're supposed to discuss a number of issues ranging from troop deployments in Haiti to extending a free trade agreement. Kenya's trade minister says that they have prepared more than 30 bankable projects. They're worth over $20 billion. Ruto will pitch these to American investors. If he can land a big deal, people may forget about the luxury jet. If not, he could be in trouble. Our planet is 70% water. You know that already. But did you know that 80% of the ocean remains unexplored? It has never been mapped. It has never been seen by humans. In fact, we know more about Mars than we know about our own ocean floor. So it is ironic that a project for NASA's expedition to Mars made a groundbreaking discovery about our seas. Here's what it found. Living underwater can reverse aging. I know it sounds unbelievable, so let me show you. This is Joseph Dituri. He's a retired naval officer. He lived underwater for 100 days inside a compact pod, a bunker of sorts, in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, the deeper you go underwater, the higher the pressure, and Dituri was 30 feet below the surface. So he was living in a highly pressurized environment. He was testing the pod for NASA's next mission to Mars, where spacefaring humans will face a similar environment. But that's not all that he managed to do here. He shattered a world record for time spent underwater. And with that, he managed to reverse the clock. After being submerged for 100 days, Dituri came out 10 years younger. Before the mission, he was 55 years old. That's his chronological age. And his biological age was 44, meaning that's how old his body really is. He has the body of a 44-year-old. But when he got out of the water, his biological age was 34. So he had de-aged by a decade. It may sound like aquatic voodoo, but it's just science. Diamonds are made under pressure. But that's not all. That's not all that pressure can do. It can also reverse the body's age down to the cellular level. Let me tell you how. These are telomeres. These are structures that are found on the ends of our chromosomes, kind of like the plastic tips at the end of shoelaces. As you age, as you grow, cells divide, so telomeres get shorter. Once they're gone, chromosomes lose their protection and cells die. So the idea is, the longer telomeres exist, the longer cells will live and the slower you will age. And that's exactly what happens underwater. When Dituri emerged on dry land, his telomeres were longer, about 20% longer than before the dive. And this has made him fitter. He had 17 times the number of stem cells. His inflammation was down by half. His cholesterol levels also plummeted. His sleep had improved dramatically. In short, his health underwent remarkable transformation and his aging reversed. But before you dive into the ocean, here's a disclaimer. Dituri is a professional diver. He has world-class equipment to survive underwater. He has both skills and resources at his disposal, which does not really apply to everyone. But longevity is not a gate-kept secret. We're living in exciting times. Humans are increasingly discovering how to reverse aging thanks to what they call biohacking. This is a means to enhance the body's functions and by proxy, slow down the aging process through tools, pills, and replacement surgeries. For instance, one man swapped his blood with that of a teenager. This man is 46 years old, but his biological age is 18. It's a bit extreme. But there are other techniques as well, like the use of hyperbaric chambers. These chambers usually contain pure oxygen. They increase the pressure of air, similar to what happens to the body underwater. This can improve brain health and boost healing, which slows down aging. But if all of this sounds too complicated or expensive, science has a simple suggestion for you. Reduce the damage to your body, which applies to your eating habits, environmental factors, and lifestyle patterns. According to a study, your lifestyle choices can influence your genes. They can offset the impact of genes by 62% and add 5 years to your life. If you have a healthy lifestyle, you will have healthy cells, meaning a younger body. So before you build the next Atlantis city, know that you don't have to turn your back on basics to turn back the clock. Food is a basic human need, yet figuring out what to eat can be a complicated task. You must play a game of rapid fire. What should you eat? Should you go out or cook for yourself? What can you afford? Do you have time to prepare food? Do you have the right groceries? What is healthy and should you care? Welcome to adulthood. This is going to be your life forever, and if things weren't messy already, prepare yourself for a hawkish culinary culture where certain foods are worshipped while others are vilified, and restrictive diets are celebrated. This pressure can be unpalatable, but there is a saving grace: intuitive eating. This diet trend is all the rage now. There are books, over 1 billion mentions on TikTok, and celebrity recommendations. And before you scoff, know that this diet trend is the farthest thing from dieting. In fact, intuitive eating is an anti-diet movement. So what is it? What is intuitive eating? It's a dietary approach based on one simple idea. Your body already knows what it needs. So intuitive eating focuses on a person's internal hunger cues. There is no eating plan, no calorie counting, no list of acceptable foods. You get to decide what you want to eat. I know this sounds like a chapter in the anarchist cookbook or a 10-year-old mastermind's proposition. You may as well eat pizza till you pass out and tear down health initiatives for children. But intuitive eating is not an all-you-can-eat permission. At its core, this approach is about intuition, about relying on your body, knowing what kinds of food feel good and how much of it you should eat. And science proves that this intuition exists. Junk food activates reward systems in the brain. It feels good in the moment, but it is not satisfying for long. Overeating or eating only junk does not feel good physically. It doesn't feel good mentally either, because human bodies want nourishing food. So intuitive dieting or eating balances nutrition with desires, or so they say, and it can be healthy for you, both physically and mentally. Studies say this improves blood pressure, blood sugar, and cholesterol levels. But it may not help you lose weight if that's what you're looking for. Most of its benefits are psychological. According to studies, it improves body image, self-esteem, and well-being. It reduces the guilt and shame around diets and creates more brain space to actually eat healthy. Intuitive eaters are more likely to eat fruits and vegetables and less likely to engage in harmful behaviors like taking diet pills or binge eating. Now, this may sound like woke propaganda. After all, this trend is a hit among Gen Z, but it may also be the need of the hour. 1 in 5 young people show signs of disordered eating worldwide because diet culture is ingrained in the modern society, so much so that research says that girls as young as 5 restrict their diets. 62% of younger women worry about their weight regularly, as do 40% of younger men. Yet, there is no winning. Chronic dieting sets us up to fail. It comes with strict rules. If you break one rule, all bets are off, and chances are you end up overeating. This takes a huge psychological toll. It is linked to depression, anxiety, and poor physical health. So it's a vicious cycle. Diet, cheat, give up, repeat. Because society rarely teaches us how to have a healthy relationship with food. Eating without rules feels risky. And as with most things in life, limits are crucial. But you don't have to police food. Also, intuitive eating may not work for everyone, but it can teach us how to understand our own impulses and quieten them. So my point is quite simple. When it comes to eating, sticks don't work. It's time we turn to carrots instead.